Tonight, you're not scrolling or rehearsing tomorrow's to-do list. You're sitting inside Gyr's hall, close enough to hear horn cups clink softly, close enough to feel the hearth settle into its steady work, close enough to notice how one laugh can land just a little too sharp in the smoke. Before you fall asleep, you will watch how a feast is enta-only food in the Norse world. It is reputation maintenance. You'll feel the comfort of a room where everyone knows the rules. Sip, nod, praise the host, keep the mood smooth. And you'll see how one wrong voice can bend the whole night. Not with a sword, but with a sentence said at the wrong volume. 3 small senses to keep you company. The mead's sweet metal scent on your breath, the fire's soft crackle answering itself, and the careful clink of a cup being placed down as if noise might offend the furniture. Something in the room keeps time, a slow, obedient tap of wood settling under weight, repeating whenever someone shifts their knees. If your breathing starts to follow it, perfect. Inhale 4, exhale 6. If you enjoy stories where myth is told like a quiet walk through a loud room, consider subscribing only if you want more nights like this, where history and legend speak softly enough to let you sleep. And tell me where and what time are you listening from? I like to imagine the hall remembers its guests, even the ones who never speak, because tonight's story doesn't begin with thunder or battle or prophecy. It begins with manners, with warmth, with the illusion that everything is stable. And then Loki arrives carrying grievance like a hin blade, and he starts naming people one by one, calmly like someone reading from a list. In a hall built on courtesy, an insult isn't entertainment. It's damage, and once the first name is spoken, the feast stops being a feast. It becomes a court without a judge, and every silence starts to sound like agreement. You might not expect a myth about a very loud mouth to begin with something as gentle as table manners, but that's how this one slips in. A warm hall, a patient fire, the kind of place where people pretend they are only here for the drink, when really they're here for the feeling of being included. If your room is quiet right now, let it stay that way. Let your shoulders drop as if they've finally remembered they're allowed to. In the old stories, Gyr's Hall has a reputation for being the sort of room that behaves. Not because the walls are strict, but because everyone inside is trying to be their best self at the same time, which is exhausting in a very polite way. The benches are arranged like an agreement. The horn cups travel down the line at a steady pace, like a slow ceremonial conveyor belt of mead and dignity. You can almost hear the soft clink when someone sets a cup down carefully, not to disturb the conversation, not to announce anything, not to make the fire look up. Even laughter has an indoor voice here, rounded, warm, practiced. It's the kind of laughter that says, "We are fine. We are all fine. Please don't ask follow-up questions." And when a place like that is working properly, it feels oddly safe. You start to believe the world is stable. You start to believe that if you keep the rhythm, sip, nod, smile, listen, nothing sharp will happen. Someone tells a story that has been told before, and everyone reacts at exactly the correct moment, like a group chat where nobody argues and nobody double texts. Someone compliments the host, not too passionately, and the host accepts it with the humble posture of someone who absolutely knows they've done well. A feast is not only food. It is performance. It is reputation polished with every toast, like a cup rubbed clean until it reflects your face back at you in a flattering way. Sometimes the gods sit like that too, as if they're just people with very good posture and unusually complicated family trees. They don't always need thunder or prophecy or wolves chasing the sun. Sometimes they just need a bench that doesn't wobble and a drink that arrives before the conversation gets dry. You can picture them leaning in, trading stories that sound safe in a crowded room. Bragi, god of poetry, speaking like someone who has never posted a draft online without editing it 12 times. Idun, with that quiet presence that makes people unconsciously lower their voices around her, as if youth itself prefers calm. Even Odin, who is never truly off duty, can sit with his one eye half-lidded, listening like a man pretending he's not collecting everything. And this is why one wrong voice can bend the whole night, because everyone knows the rules. They've been following them so carefully that the rules have become part of the air. A feast like this has invisible walls. Don't embarrass the host. Don't embarrass yourself. Don't drag old arguments into new cups. Don't mention things people have agreed to forget. Don't say the quiet part out loud. It's a cozy agreement, a soft social blanket, and everyone is tucked in underneath it, which is lovely until someone arrives holding a pair of scissors. Loki doesn't enter a room the way most people do. Most people enter as if they're asking permission. Loki enters as if permission is a myth someone else invented. The stories say he comes carrying grievance like a hidden blade, which is a dramatic way of saying he has an excellent memory for slights. The kind of memory that doesn't forget who interrupted whom, who laughed at what, who said, of course, with just a little too much meaning. He remembers every small dismissal the way some people remember song lyrics from 10 years ago, unhelpful, detailed, and impossible to erase. He doesn't arrive to celebrate. He arrives to expose, as if the hall itself is a stage, and he has been waiting for the spotlight to finally notice him. And the strange thing is, he doesn't need to shout at first. That's what makes it worse, in a sleepy, domestic way. The loudest conflicts often begin with a calm sentence, a small correction, a name said with too much precision. Before he even speaks, the room feels tighter, as if the air expects trouble, and starts holding its breath. You can picture the way a few gods glance at their cups, suddenly interested in the rim, in the small imperfections of horn and polish, in anything that isn't the look on Loki's face. Someone smiles too quickly, like a person trying to delete a message after it's already been read. Then Loki begins, calmly, slowly, like someone reading names from a list. And you can almost feel the temperature of the room change, not from fire, but from attention. There's a particular kind of cruelty that doesn't look like anger. It looks like detail. Loki's insults are not vague. He doesn't simply say, "You're bad." He says, "You did this, and I remember it, and I'm going to say it in front of everyone while the meat is still warm." Accusation sounds like truth when it is specific. It has dates in it. It has places. It has a tone that suggests the speaker has receipts, even if the receipts are mythical and written on the inside of someone's conscience. He aims for pride, fidelity, bravery, honor, because those are the gods' public armor. In a culture where a reputation is power, humiliation isn't entertainment, it is damage. The kind that clings. The kind that changes how people look at you when you enter a room. Loki understands the economy of shame, the way a modern person understands the economy of notifications. It is not the biggest message that rattles you. It's the one that arrives at the worst time, in the worst context, where everyone can see you reading it. Someone tries to answer with humor because humor is the softest shield. Someone laughs too loudly and the laugh doesn't survive the next line. Someone offers a threat because threats feel strong and strength feels safer than embarrassment. But threats in a feast hall are like standing up too quickly on a bench. Everyone notices and the whole structure creaks. Someone else offers excuses that sound like they were prepared in advance, which is never comforting. And the mood changes in layers. Embarrassment first, then anger, then that uneasy feeling that Loki might know too much, or that he might simply be saying what everyone privately suspects. The most exhausting part is that he keeps going. Name after name. Like a slow knocking on every door in a hallway, even the doors nobody uses. And because it's a feast, because people are seated, because the cups keep moving and the fire keeps burning, no one can easily pretend the room is not happening. It is not like you can step outside for a second when you're in the middle of a myth and the walls are made of story. You can't mute Loki. You can only sit there and feel your shoulders tense in sympathy, like you re-watching someone else have an awkward conversation and Your body doesn't know, and I listen to your problem. There's a very tired kind of comedy in it, too, if you let yourself notice it gently. The gods, who have faced giants and monsters and the end of the world as a scheduled event, are suddenly stuck in something far more inconvenient, a social disaster. A night where the rules are failing. A night where your reputation, that carefully polished cup, is suddenly being held up to the light to show all the smudges. It is like watching the most powerful people you can imagine get trapped in a group dinner where someone starts bringing up old texts. Very cosmic. Very relatable. Very much the sort of thing you would rather listen to from far away with your eyes closed while you sink deeper into your pillow. And somewhere underneath all of Loki's sharpness is the question the story quietly refuses to let go of. Why does he do it? Not the surface answer, because he's Loki, because he's a trickster, because he's difficult. The deeper, more uncomfortable answer. The one that makes the myth feel like it's looking at you through the smoke. Loki is not only attacking, he is reflecting. A trickster's mirror is not a kind mirror. It doesn't soften the angles. It shows the gods what they prefer not to see about themselves. He points at hypocrisy because hypocrisy is the easiest crack to widen a room full of pride. And pride, even divine pride, has a sleepy habit of thinking it is permanent until someone touches it with the smallest pin and it deflates with a long, surprised sigh. The more perfect a society pretends to be, the more violent its reaction to exposure becomes. That's not a lecture. It's just a quiet pattern, like noticing that a room gets colder when someone opens a door. The hall is built on shared stories. Who is honorable, who is brave, who is faithful, who is wise. Those stories are social glue. They keep the benches aligned. They keep the cups moving without spilling. If Loki's words are accepted even slightly, the glue starts to melt. And suddenly, everyone has to hold themselves together with their own hands, which is messy and tiring. So his cruelty becomes a test too, whether he admits it or not. How strong is their honor when it's questioned out loud? How stable is the room when one person refuses to play the role they were assigned? In a strange way, Loki behaves like someone who has been watching a performance for too long and can too resist shouting from the back row. Not because the play is bad, but because the acting is too good and it makes him suspicious. He treats the hall like a court, and every toast becomes evidence. The feast becomes a trial without a judge, which is the worst kind, because everyone has to judge everyone else, and nobody gets to go home feeling clean. And beneath the god's anger is something quieter, fear. Not the fear of being harmed physically. These are not delicate beings. It's the fear that order depends on everyone agreeing to the same story. That the old rhythm can be broken by one voice. That stability is not a wall, but a performance, and performances can fail. If the hall accepts Loki's words, even a little, then the idea of the gods as flawless starts to wobble, and wobbling is contagious. You can feel that fear in the way people respond. The way they stop trying to argue and start trying to contain. Debate is the first stage when people still believe conversation will fix things. Containment is what happens when conversation fails. Containment is when the room decides the problem is not what was said, but that it was said at all. And it's a very human moment, wrapped in a divine costume. The moment everyone decides the night has only one direction left. Because the alternative is to sit in uncertainty, and uncertainty is colder than mead. Eventually, the hall does what halls do when they've had enough. It stops being a place of open exchange and becomes a place of boundaries. Not dramatic boundaries, practical ones. The kind you set when you're retired and your social battery is dead, and you want the evening to stop being complicated. Threats become action. Not because everyone suddenly becomes brave, but because everyone becomes done. Loki's exit becomes as important as his entrance, which is a funny thing to say about a myth, but also not funny at all in that quiet way. The story, if you look at it softly, is reminding you that speech can be treated like a crime when it threatens the group as image. Not every truth is welcomed. Not every confession is considered helpful. Sometimes the room prefers comfort over clarity, even if comfort is just a blanket pulled over a pile of problems. And if you've ever been in a room where everyone smiled through something unpleasant, you can understand why a feast would demand silence the way a tired body demands sleep. But for now, you don't have to demand anything. You don't have to fix the hall. You don't have to decide whether Loki is a villain or necessary annoyance or simply the person who ruins dinner because he cannot stand a polished surface. You can let the final feeling be quiet. Imagine the hearth still burning, steady and stubborn, the same way your bedside lamp keeps shining even if your thoughts wander. Imagine a horn cup being set down carefully, as if noise itself is now suspicious, as if the room is learning to move softly again. Hold one gentle lesson if you want one, the way you might hold a warm mug with both hands. Truth said with malice can still sound like truth, and that is why it hurts. And maybe another lesson, even smaller, like a crumb you find on your sleeve. Reputation is a strange kind of food. It never really fills you, but people keep serving it anyway. The smoke thins. The hall settles. Somewhere, the memory of every word lingers in the rafters like a smell you can't quite name. And if the story feels like it should end, you can let it refuse. Let it drift instead, like the last warmth in a room after the conversation has quieted. The benches remain. The cups remain. The fire keeps doing its slow work, turning wood into a softer kind of darkness. Loki's voice, whether you love it or hate it, becomes just another sound the hall has heard, another ripple that passes, leaving the surface calm again, at least for a while. And you can keep breathing in that calm, as if the night has endless room to continue, even when you don't. You know what's strangely soothing, in a tired sort of way, is that even the gods have nights where the biggest problem I as a monster or a prophecy, but a guest who should not be here. Not a dragon at the door, not a giant on the horizon. Just one person stepping into a warm room with the calm confidence of someone who has decided the rules are optional. If your room is still, let it stay that way. Let your breathing settle into something easy, like a cup finding a steady spot on a table. And if you want to answer quietly just to yourself, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Gyr's Hall, in the stories, is the kind of place that runs on routine, warmth, order, the soft rhythm of serving and song. People sitting as if the world is stable, as if stability is something you can schedule, like a polite dinner that begins on time and ends before anyone says anything regrettable. It's almost funny how much the gods enjoy this, how they lean into it. They trade stories that sound safe in a crowded room. They do the gentle social work of agreeing with each other at the right moments. They let reputation shine under the firelight, polished with every toast, as if honor were something you could maintain the way you maintain a nice wooden table. Wipe it down, keep it dry. Don't let anyone set a wet cup directly on the surface. And because everyone knows the rules start to feel like part of the air. You don't even notice them until something disrupts them, until a voice arrives that doesn't fit the rhythm, until a door opens at the wrong beat, and the whole night, this carefully balanced little performance tilts by half a degree. Not enough to spill the mead right away. Just enough that you suddenly become aware of gravity. Loki, when he enters, doesn't burst in like a storm. That would be too honest. He enters with the quietness that makes people look up anyway. There's a particular kind of silence that follows someone who carries something heavy, even if the heavy thing is invisible. He brings grievance in the way some people bring a damp coat into a warm room subtle at first, but you can feel it in the air. The story makes it sound sharp like a hidden blade, and maybe it is. But it's also something softer and more tedious, memory. The kind that doesn't let anything slide. The kind that remembers every slight the way a tired brain remembers embarrassing moments from 5 years ago at 3 in the morning for no practical reason at all. He doesn't enter to celebrate, he enters to expose. And there's something almost domestic about that if you look at it sideways. Like the way someone can sit down at a family dinner and, instead of eating, begin quietly recounting everything everyone has ever done wrong, with perfect accuracy and no raised voice. In a hall like Jeers, where courtesy is the currency, that is an unspeakable form of rudeness. It's not loud. It's worse. It's precise. It's said he arrives uninvited. And in these old stories, invitation matters. Hospitality is sacred in a way that feels both noble and extremely practical, because in cold places, being turned away can be deadly, and being welcomed can be the difference between surviving and becoming a cautionary tale. So there's a whole moral weight to a seat at the table. A place by the fire is not just comfort, it's a statement: you belong here, you're safe here. We recognize you. Loki steps into that statement and treats it like an open door at a party where someone forgot to lock it. He behaves as if the hall owes him a place, which is, honestly, one of the most exhausting attitudes a person can bring anywhere. He is not the kind of guest who wonders if he's welcome. He is the kind who assumes welcome is simply what happens when he appears. And the gods, for a moment, don't know which part to respond to. Because the thing about social rules is that they are strongest when everyone agrees to play along. If you argue with an uninvited guest too directly, you break the illusion of harmony yourself. You become part of the disruption. It's like noticing mid-conversation that someone has started recording, and now you're suddenly very aware of how you sound. The hall is warm, the cups are full, the song is steady, so everyone tries, instinctively, to continue as if nothing has happened, to keep the rhythm intact, to pretend the night can absorb this. That's when Loki's real talent appears. Not shape-shifting, not clever escapes, just timing. He doesn't rush. He doesn't demand attention. He lets attention come to him naturally, the way a small crack in a cup draws your eye once you notice it. He stands there long enough for everyone to register him, to feel the slight tightening in the room, to sense that the air has changed its texture. Even the fire in your imagination seems to pause, not because fire has manners, but because you do. And you project your manners onto everything when you're nervous. Before he speaks, the room already feels tighter. Not dramatically, not like panic. More like when you realize you've sent a message to the wrong person and you were waiting for the reply. A quiet, stomach-level awareness. People glance at their cups. People suddenly find the rim of a horn cup fascinating, as if the secrets of the universe are written in the curve of it. Someone clears their throat, as if the throat has done something wrong. Someone offers Loki a seat, because that's what you do when you read trying to keep a room from becoming a story. And Loki takes the seat in the way someone takes a seat they believe was always theirs. Which is a small detail, but it matters because small details are where these myths live when you're trying to make them sleepy. The bench creaks. The fur at someone's shoulder shifts. The meat sloshes a little, then settles. The hall continues to be warm, and that warmth makes everything more uncomfortable, because warmth suggests safety, and this is not safe in the social sense. This is not someone might die unsafe. It is someone might say something that cannot be unsaid, unsafe, which in a room full of pride is practically the same thing. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can subscribe, or don't. Loki certainly didn't ask permission to join the feast, so I won't pressure you. I'm trying to keep this hall calmer than he did. The strange part is that Loki's grievance doesn't have to be obvious to work. It's enough that he has it. It sits on him like a smell you can't identify, but you know you don't like. The story says he remembers every slight that others dismiss, and you can imagine how that would feel, living inside his head. A mind like a ledger, always open. A mind that replays tiny moments with the devotion of a historian who refuses to let anyone forget footnotes. Someone once cut him off mid-sentence. Someone once laughed at the wrong time. Someone once praised someone else a little too warmly and forgot to praise him. None of it is huge, but that's the problem. Huge injuries can be mourned and healed. Small ones can be collected. And Loki collects. You can picture him sitting there while the hall tries to continue. He listens as if he's not listening. He watches as if he's not watching. He is the kind of person who seems calm because his storm is internal, neatly organized, alphabetized, ready to be referenced. It's almost a hobby. A terrible hobby, but still. Some people knit, some people scroll. Loki remembers. Over and over until memory becomes a kind of identity. Until grievance feels like proof that you matter. There's a quiet irony in that, if you let it be gentle. Loki, who can transform into so many things, chooses to be this. A person who cannot let go of social pain. It's very divine and very ordinary at the same time. Like a god showing up at a party with the emotional equivalent of a long, carefully drafted email that begins with, "As per my last message." And in the hall, the gods respond the way people respond when they sense that kind of email energy in the room. They become careful. They become extra polite. They try to smooth the atmosphere with small comforts. Another cup offered. Another plate passed. Someone makes a harmless joke about the quality of the mead, because mead jokes are safe. Someone compliments Jyr's hospitality again, because complimenting the host is a way of reminding the room that this is supposed to be pleasant. But Loki doesn't enter to be soothed, he enters to expose. And exposure in a place built on reputation is like turning the lights up too bright. The hall is a space where everyone's image is maintained with each toast. The gods sit as if their names are clean, as if their stories are stable. Loki sits as if he is holding a cloth full of dirt, and he's about to shake it out over the table just to prove it was there. If you want a sleepy micro-thought to hold for a moment, hold this. In these myths, the most powerful thing isn't always a weapon. Sometimes it's the ability to change the mood of a room. The ability to make everyone suddenly aware of themselves. The ability to make laughter feel risky. That's a kind of power that doesn't sparkle. It just weighs. And because Loki is Loki, he doesn't begin with a roar. He begins like someone reading names from a list, calmly, quietly, almost politely in the worst possible way. Because politeness can be used like a knife if you sharpen it enough. He takes the shape of a civilized man and uses it to deliver something uncivilized. Public memory. You can imagine the first sentence dropping into the hall like a pebble into a cup. Small, contained, but the ripples touch everything. The room changes in a way you can feel in tiny details. Shoulders tightening, faces turning, eyes shifting away and then back, as if everyone is trying to find the correct place to look that will make this stop. The fire keeps burning because fire is loyal to its job. The song, if there is still song, becomes thinner, like someone humming because silence feels too honest. And this is where the myth becomes strangely tender, if you allow yourself to notice it without waking up fully. Because beneath Loki's cruelty, beneath his need to expose, is a very old fear. The fear of being overlooked, of not being honored, of not being included in the version of the story where everyone is admired. Loki wants the room's attention the way a cold hand wants warmth. He doesn't ask for it nicely. He takes it. But the hunger is there. The gods, meanwhile, are caught in a very boring trap. They still want to be polite. Even offended gods like to believe they have control. They want to respond with dignity. They want the hall to remain a hall, not a scene. And so they hesitate. They try to keep the night from becoming a public unraveling. They try to restore the old rhythm, drink, toast, laugh, move on. But Loki's presence makes move on impossible because move on is a kind of forgetting, and Loki is allergic to forgetting. He doesn't allow the room to leave the past behind. He drags the past into the present like a chair scraping across the floor, slow, annoying, impossible to ignore. And as he speaks calmly, like someone reciting a list, you start to feel what the hall is really made of. Not stone, not wood. Shared agreement, shared silence, shared stories. It's almost like watching a group of people realize at the same time that their piece has been rented, not owned. That stability is not permanent, that it depends on everyone deciding to keep it. And Loki is the one person who has decided not to keep it. Not tonight, not in this hall, not with these witnesses. If you've ever been in a room where someone begins to just say a few things, and everyone else immediately feels the weight of those words before they even arrive, you understand this myth more than you think. It doesn't need battle. It doesn't need a chase. It only needs a warm hall and a man with a memory. The kind of memory that won't stay quiet because it believes quiet is how injustice survives. Even if the injustice is mostly someone not laughing at the right time, which is not exactly the strongest legal case, but Loki has never been picky about evidence. And now, as the hall tightens and the air turns expectant, you can feel the story hovering at the edge of what comes next. The moment when words stop being mere sounds and start behaving like tools. The moment when a feast meant to be comfort begins to resemble a court simply because one guest refuses to let the night remain soft. But we don't have to rush there. We can let the scene linger in this uneasy calm. Loki seated. The gods aware of themselves. The mead still warm. The fire still steady. The horn cup still moving, because routine tries its best to survive everything. The hall holding its breath, not because it is afraid of violence, but because it is afraid of the kind of sentence that changes how people look at each other forever. So let your own breath stay slow. Let the story move at the pace of embers settling into ash. Loki's voice can be present without becoming loud in your mind. The hall can be tense without becoming sharp in your body. Just imagine the soft scrape of a cup being set down carefully. The careful way someone adjusts their cloak, as if adjusting their cloak could also adjust the mood. Imagine the smoke thinning and thickening in small waves, like the room itself is breathing. And somewhere in that warm, uneasy air, Loki keeps remembering, quietly, patiently, as if memory is his true shape, as if the list is endless, as if the night could go on, repeating the same slow rhythm cup, fire, voice, silence until everyone forgets why they came, and only the sound of words remains, drifting, waiting, almost ready to turn into something sharper, but not yet. Not quite yet. It's a peculiar kind of weapon when you think about it, to take a warm room and turn it into a courtroom without moving a single piece of furniture, no benches rearranged, no official summons, no dramatic gavel, just a voice that decides the night will be about accountability now, and somehow the air agrees. If your room is still, let it stay that way. Let this part of the story arrive softly, like a cup being set down with too much care, as if everyone suddenly remembers that noise carries. Loki's words don't have to be loud to be heavy. Sometimes the most exhausting thing is not shouting, but certainty delivered in a calm tone. He begins in a way that feels almost responsible, which is part of the trick. He doesn't burst into insults like fireworks. He lays them out like paperwork. He speaks as if he's simply clarifying something for the group, as if this is a meeting that ran a little too late, and now everyone is regretting agreeing to just a quick check-in. It's oddly modern, in that sleepy way where you recognize the sensation before you recognize the myth. There is a particular type of person who can make a room feel guilty just by choosing the right words and pausing at the right moment. Loki in this hall is that person, except with better cheekbones and worse intentions, and the hall itself helps him. Jyr's Hall is meant to be a place of hospitality, of serving and song, but hospitality has rules, And rules create expectations, and expectations create pressure. When everyone is trying to behave correctly, it doesn't take much to expose how carefully they've been behaving. Loki aims for that carefulness. He targets pride, fidelity, bravery, honor, things the gods like to wear like clean cloaks. In a warm, crowded space, a cloak looks impressive. In a courtroom, a cloak looks like a costume. He doesn't have to prove anything with thunder. He only has to point at the seams. The strange thing is that an accusation can sound like truth when it is specific. That's one of the oldest human problems, and the gods, for all their divine habits, are not immune to it. If Loki said something vague, the room could ignore him. Vague statements drift away like smoke, but he speaks with details, and details have weight. It's like hearing your full name said out loud when you were hoping to stay anonymous. Your spine reacts before your mind does. A name is a hook. A detail is a hook with a barb. So he speaks and the feast starts to shift, not because anyone stands up, but because everyone's attention stands up inside them. The rhythm of serving, the easy passing of cups, the pleasant interruptions of laughter, all of it becomes cautious. People sit more slowly. People stop mid-gesture and complete the gesture anyway, because stopping feels like admission. Someone adjusts their grip on a horn cup, not because the cup is heavy, but because suddenly hands feel visible. It's almost tender how quickly a room can become self-conscious, like watching animals freeze in a forest when they hear a twig snap. Not panic, just awareness. Loki's method is simple, and that simplicity is part of why it works. He wants a reaction. Anger proves guilt. Silence looks like agreement. Defensiveness sounds like a crack. He sets each line down like a small stone on a scale, and the scale doesn't have to tip much to change the mood. The gods are used to being admired. They are used to being toasted. They are not used to being examined, not like this, not publicly, not in a placement for comfort. It's one thing to be judged in battle. It is another to be judged while holding a warm drink and trying to remember if you already complimented the host. There's a quietly funny detail in all this, if you let it be gentle. The hall becomes a trial without a judge, which means everyone is both witness and defendant and jury, and none of them signed up for it. It is the worst kind of social event, the kind where you can tell if you were supposed to respond or just endure. Loki, of course, is delighted by that confusion. Confusion is a soft spot. Confusion is where a person's posture collapses a little, where a proud face becomes a human face. If Loki has a talent, it's not merely for trickery. It is for finding the exact place where someone's dignity is held together with a small stitch, and then gently, almost politely, tugging that stitch. He doesn't shout at first. That's important. Shouting would give the room permission to treat him like a brute. Calmness forces them to treat him like a speaker. Calmness forces the formality to stay in place, and formality, when weaponized, is exhausting. A calm voice can make an insult sound like testimony. A calm voice can make the room feel like it must respond thoughtfully, which is hard to do when you are embarrassed. And embarrassment is the first layer that appears, thin as ash. Embarrassment in a hall full of reputation is not a mild feeling. It's not cute. It's not entertainment. It's damage. It's a stain on a cloak that everyone can see. Loki understands that. He targets what the gods present to one another: honor, loyalty, courage. He brings up secrets the way someone brings up old photos, casually, with a smile that suggests they don't realize what they're doing, even though they absolutely realize. He makes the room feel smaller. Not physically smaller, socially smaller, like the walls are leaning in to listen. And the gods answer him in different ways, which is part of the slow, sleepy interest of this scene. Some respond with threats because threats are a familiar language. A threat is a way of saying, I still have power, even if the power is not the point. Some respond with excuses because excuses are what you reach for when you want to stay in the room without losing face. Some respond with forced laughter That brittle kind that arrives too late and leaves too quickly, like a chair scraping across the floor when someone tries to stand and then thinks better of it. Forced laughter is a brave little creature, but it rarely survives the next line. You can imagine the sound of that laughter dying, not dramatically, but quietly, like a candle sputtering when the wick is damp. A laugh begins, someone else tries to join, and then the laugh realizes it has no support. It collapses into a cough. The person who laughed takes a sip as if the sip will erase the moment. The sip does not erase the moment. The sip only makes it wetter. Loki keeps going, one name at a time. That detail in the story is so sleepy and so chilling in a very domestic way, like someone slowly knocking on every door in a hallway. Not to break in, but to remind you that the hallway exists and you are inside it. He doesn't need to throw anything. He doesn't need to move quickly. He only needs persistence, and persistence is the most boring and effective form of cruelty. It's a drip that keeps dripping until even the strongest person starts thinking about the sound. If you want a tiny modern analogy that won't wake you up, think of a group chat where someone suddenly scrolls up and starts quoting old messages. Not the ones you remember proudly. The ones you forgot on purpose. The ones that made sense in the moment, but look strange in the light of later judgment. The moment someone starts quoting, the entire chat changes temperature. People stop typing. People reread their own words. People think about leaving, but leaving looks like guilt. Staying looks like endurance. There is no graceful option. Loki in Jyr's Hall is essentially scrolling. Imagine how awkward it becomes to accept a platter of roasted something while being accused of something else. Imagine someone holding out a piece of bread like a peace offering while Loki is calmly dismantling their image. There's something almost comedic about the mismatch. The body wants to eat. The social self wants to vanish. The mead wants to keep flowing. The conversation wants to turn into stone. In a culture where reputation is power, humiliation is not entertainment, it's a kind of theft. Loki steals the comfort of being admired. He steals the ease of being seen the way you prefer to be seen. And because the gods are gods, their reactions carry extra weight, but the core feeling is simple. No one likes being exposed in public. Not even divinity can make that pleasant. If anything, divinity makes it worse because the fall from perfect to problematic is a long fall, even if it happens in a single sentence. As Loki's speech continues, the mood changes in layers. First embarrassment, then irritation, which is embarrassment trying to regain control. Then rage, which is irritation deciding it needs armor. And underneath all of that, a quieter feeling, fear. Not fear of being harmed physically, fear of being known. Fear that Loki might know too much, or worse, that Loki might say too much. Because in a hall like this, the story everyone shares is the glue that holds the night together. If the glue melts, the whole performance collapses into something raw. And that's what Loki is really threatening in a slow, irritating, very thorough way. He's threatening the social glue. He's threatening the ability of the gods to sit together and pretend they are united, consistent, noble. He's doing the annoying thing where he points out that the group's image depends on everyone politely cooperating. The more perfect a society pretends to be, the more violent its reaction can be when exposure appears. But even violent here doesn't have to mean swords. It can mean voices sharpening. It can mean the room deciding it has had enough. It can mean the atmosphere turning from warm to controlled. The hall begins to feel like a place that wants silence back. You can sense it in the imagined gestures. Someone leans towards someone else and whispers, not kindly, but urgently. Someone's face tightens. Someone's jaw sets. Someone stops eating because chewing feels ridiculous during a moral crisis. Someone else keeps eating anyway, which is honestly the most powerful move in the room. There is always one person at a tense table who continues to eat slowly as if the body refuses to participate in the drama. That person is not always wise, but they are consistent. Loki, of course, does not stop when the room tightens. Tightness is a sign that he is reaching the nerve. He pushes a little more, not with volume, but with rhythm. Accusation, pause. Detail, pause. Name, pause. It's almost like a lullaby if you ignore the content. A very mean lullaby, but still rhythmic, still patterned, still designed to keep attention just barely awake. There's a dark comedy in realizing that even cruelty can have good pacing. And the gods, caught in this rhythm, begin to respond in the ways people respond when they feel cornered. Someone tries to deny, but denial sounds thin when the accuser is calm. Someone tries to counter-accuse because that's a way of distributing the discomfort. Someone tries to change the subject, which is the oldest survival tactic in a tense conversation, but Loki doesn't allow the subject to drift. He keeps pulling it back, gently, like a hand returning your face to the light when you try to turn away. It's worth noticing softly that Loki is not just insulting for sport. The myth carries that edge, but it also carries something more pathetic. Loki is reflecting what the gods prefer not to see. He points at hypocrisy because hypocrisy is the easiest crack to widen in a room full of pride. This is why his words hurt, not because they are loud, but because some of them land close to something true. Close enough that even the gods, who have lived a long time with their own stories, feel the sting of recognition. Recognition is the sharpest kind of embarrassment. Recognition is what turns a laugh into silence. If you're getting sleepy, let your mind drift on the smaller sensory details rather than the sharper meanings. Imagine the slow movement of smoke above the hearth, curling and uncurling like a thought that won't settle. Imagine the warmth of the fire on one side of your face and the cooler air behind your neck, where the hall's draft sneaks in. Imagine the weight of a horn cup in your hand, the faint smell of mead sweet, fermented, a little stubborn. Imagine how the wood of the benches feels under a palm that is trying to look relaxed. Imagine the soft clink of cups that continues, even as the mood grows heavier, because habit doesn't stop just because feelings have changed. The feast, in that sense, becomes two things at once, a social event and a slow unraveling. A room can hold both. People can keep passing bread while their pride is being peeled back. People can keep sipping while their reputations are being questioned. It's almost impressive how much normal life can continue alongside discomfort. This too is very human, even when gods are involved. The universe can be dramatic, but a party is still a party. Someone still has to refill cups. Someone still has to mind the fire. Someone still has to decide whether to look at Loki or look away. And Loki keeps going because the point is not to win a debate. The point is to make the room admit that it is not as pure as it pretends. He wants the gods to feel seen in the ways they hate. He wants them to feel the loss of control. He wants the hall to remember this night the way you remember a slightly humiliating conversation years later. Suddenly, vividly, at an inconvenient hour, without permission. So the speech continues, and the hall's comfort continues to thin. Not gone, just thinner. Like a blanket pulled too tight. Like warmth stretched across too many bodies. Like laughter that used to arrive easily, now pausing at the edge of every mouth, asking for proof that it is safe to exist. And somewhere under all the words, under all the reactions, the night itself becomes a kind of test. How long can a room built on courtesy survive one person who refuses to be courteous? We don't have to answer that yet. We can let the question hover gently without resolving. Let it float in the smoke, in the firelight, in the slow passing of cups. Let Loki's calm voice continue in the background, steady as dripping water, naming, pointing, insisting. Let the gods sit with their shoulders a little tighter, their faces a little more controlled, their dignity working overtime. Let the feast keep pretending it is still a feast, even as it begins to resemble something else. And if you feel yourself drifting, let yourself drift with the steady rhythm of it word. Sip, silence, ember over and over, as if the hall could go on like this forever, suspended in warmth and discomfort, waiting for the next sentence to land softly and change the air again. You can always tell when a room has decided something, even before anyone says it out loud. It's not dramatic. It's not a trumpet. It's the way the air stops being soft. It's the way people's eyes stop wandering and start landing in the same places. If your room is still, let it stay that way. Let the story settle into the quieter part of itself now, where the loudest thing isn't a shout, but a shared agreement forming like frost on a window. There's a moment in Lokasenna where debate gets tired. Not defeated, just tired. Like a candle that's been asked to burn too brightly for too long, and now the flame is smaller, steadier, and a little annoyed. People often imagine the gods as endlessly energetic, endlessly ready for conflict, but even gods have social stamina, and that stamina can run out before the night does. Loki's words have been doing what persistent words do. They don't just sting, they wear. They rub at pride like a sleeve rubbing at the same spot on a garment, slowly thinning it. And eventually the hall begins to behave like a hall that wants its dignity back. It's almost funny, in a sleepy way, that the turning point isn't a new insult. It's the realization that insults are no longer the main problem. The main problem is that the feast itself is losing its shape. A feast is supposed to be a performance of stability. Not just food, but a public proof that everyone can share a room without turning it into a mess. When Loki keeps going, the performance starts to wobble. And a wobbling performance makes everyone feel exposed, because then the question becomes, if we can't keep this simple thing stable, what can we keep stable? So the room does what rooms do when they can't win a conversation. It starts trying to contain it. Containment is a quieter cousin of violence. Containment is the urge to put the lid back on the pot before the stew boils over and stains the entire kitchen. The gods begin to shift from arguing with Loki to managing Loki. It's a subtle but important change, and it has the sleepy logic of household problems. You don't negotiate with a candle that's tipping toward the curtain, you just move it. You don't debate the ethics of a spill, you wipe it up. Loki, in that moment, becomes less like a speaker and more like a spill. You can imagine it in small physical details. Someone stops responding to the content of what he says and starts watching his hands. Someone watches the doorway. Someone watches the host. Someone watches the cups because cups are still being served. And it's very hard to look powerful while holding a drink you didn't pour. It becomes clear that the hall would rather return to its old rhythm than prove a point. Rhythm is comfort. Rhythm is control. Rhythm is what lets everyone pretend the world is stable, even if it isn't. And of course, Loki notices this. Loki always notices. He can feel when the room stops playing his game and starts playing its own. In a weird way, it's almost flattering to him. Being contained means you were effective enough to require containment. Being ignored would be the real punishment. So he keeps pressing, but now it is less about extracting reactions and more about refusing to let the room reclaim its smooth surface. He's like a finger tracing a crack in polished wood, insisting you look at it. You could sand it later, but he wants you to see it now. There's a particular kind of silence that appears right before consequences. Not the peaceful silence you want for sleep, but the concentrated silence that arrives when people stop improvising and start deciding. The hall grows quieter in the spaces between words. Even the fire seems to behave differently in your imagination, still warm, still steady, but no longer decorative. Just functional. The hearth is a reminder that things can burn if you let them. The smoke thins and drifts upward, as if it's trying not to get involved. If you've ever been in a situation where a group stops discussing and starts taking action, you know how oddly boring it can feel. It's not cinematic, it's procedural. It has the energy of someone saying, softly, "All right, that's enough." The gods don't need to roar to make the shift. They just need to stop treating Loki as a participant and start treating him as a problem to be removed. That change is a kind of social spell. One moment, you are in the conversation. The next moment, you are outside it, watching everyone else align without you. And Loki's exit becomes as important as his entrance. This is another sleepy, oddly specific detail that feels true to human behavior. You can say almost anything at a party if you leave well. If you leave badly, the leaving becomes the story. Loki's speech has already become a crime in the sense that it threatens the group as image. And groups are protective of their image in the same way people are protective of their face. If you scratch the face, you don't just hurt the skin. You change how everyone feels looking at it. So the hall starts looking for a way to end this that doesn't admit weakness. Ending a disturbance without looking disturbed is a talent. It is the same talent you use when you ask us to stop talking during a meeting, but try to make it sound like a scheduling issue. We're running out of time, you say, as if time is the problem and not the person. In Jyr's Hall, the gods reach for their own version of that. They can't let Loki keep speaking because if he keeps speaking, the hall becomes his stage. And they can't let him leave with the satisfaction of having shattered the mood completely, because then the feast becomes a cautionary tale about their fragility. So they do what powerful beings often do when words fail. They aim for consequence. Not necessarily immediate, not necessarily loud, but inevitable. It's the feeling that the room has taken a mental note. It's the feeling that you've been added to a list. Loki has been reading names. Now the hall reads his. In the middle of this, it helps to drift back to the sensory world again, because the myth can be sharp if you stare at it too directly. Imagine the heat of the hall on your skin, and the way warmth makes people slightly more honest, slightly looser, until the mood shifts and everyone tightens again. Imagine the smell of smoke clinging to hair and wool. Imagine the sticky sweetness of mead near the rim of a cup, and how someone absent-mindedly wipes it with their thumb because their hands need something small to do. Imagine the way wood creaks when someone shifts their weight. These tiny sounds become louder when the room goes quiet, like the hall itself is listening. There's even a strange little comedy in the idea of it. In a myth about gods and reputations and insults, the practical details still matter. Someone has to keep the fire fed. Someone has to keep serving, even if serving now feels like walking through tension with the tray. Someone has to keep their face neutral, which is exhausting. Neutral faces are a kind of labor. They're like masks that fit too tightly. You can wear them, but you feel them the whole time. And Loki, for all his sharpness, is not immune to the room's change. This is where the story becomes, quietly, about fear. Not fear as panic, but fear as the awareness that order depends on shared stories staying intact. The god's anger isn't only offended dignity, it's the fear that the glue is melting. If the hall accepts Loki's words, even slightly, the social structure starts to loosen. And loosening structures are dangerous not because they explode, but because they sag. A sagging ceiling is scarier than a thunderclap. It's slow, it's unstoppable. It turns comfort into uncertainty. So the response becomes urgent, but not urgent like running. Urgent like restoring. Restore silence. Restore hierarchy. Restore the old rhythm. Those are the instincts of a group that understands itself as a group. And here's a mild, sleepy micro hook. Feasts in Norse culture and in many cultures aren't just meals. They're social technology. They're a way of proving alliances, distributing honor, confirming who belongs where. A feast is like a living diagram of the community. Everyone is in their place. Everyone is seen. Everyone's cup is filled in the right order. Disrupt the feast, and you disrupt the diagram. Loki's crime, then, is not simply rudeness. It's diagram vandalism. He's scribbling over the lines that show who is respected and why. He's pointing at the labels and saying, this one doesn't fit. And the gods respond the way institutions respond when someone points at the labels. they don't argue forever. They tighten. It's around here that you can feel the myth drifting toward the inevitability of consequence, and we can keep it gentle by focusing on how consequence often begins, with coordination. A glance exchanged across the fire, a pause that lasts a breath too long, a cup not offered, a song not started. These are small signals, but they are the language of decisions. It's like watching birds change direction in the sky. No one bird leads, and yet all of them turn. Loki, who lives on noticing, notices. His voice might still be calm, but his posture changes, maybe only slightly. Maybe it's the way he shifts his weight, as if he's testing the floorboards for the quickest path. Maybe it's the way his eyes flick to the doorway and back, like someone casually checking their phone during a tense conversation, pretending it's nothing. Loki is a trickster, but he is also very often a survivor. He knows when a room stops being a stage and becomes a trap. And that's the part that's almost soothing, if you let it be. The myth reminds you that speech can be treated like a crime when it threatens the group S image. That's not just a God thing, that's a human thing. Humans have always had rooms where certain truths are not welcome. Not because the truths are false, but because the truths are expensive. They cost comfort, they cost stability, they cost the pleasant illusion that everyone is noble. Loki's words are expensive words, and the bill is arriving. So what does the hall do? It stops trying to be persuaded and starts trying to end the situation. Ending is not the same as resolving. Ending is just closing the door. And doors, in myths and in houses, are deeply symbolic and deeply practical. A door is a boundary you can touch. A door makes a decision physical. When a door opens, a story enters. When a door closes, the story is supposed to stay outside. Loki's entrance mattered. His exit will matter in the same simple way. The hall will remember the feeling of him leaving, the way you remember the moment a loud guest finally steps out and the room exhales. If you like subtle humor, here's a quiet observation. Loki is the kind of guest who doesn't just ruin the vibe. He makes the vibe a historical concept. People will talk about the vibe later, like archaeologists discussing a lost civilization. Before Loki, we had vibe. Someone might say, stirring their drink as if it's a serious academic field. After Loki, we had consequences, but we don't have to rush toward consequences in a sharp way. We can let them approach slowly, like footsteps in a hallway that you hear but don't see. The myth, even when it carries violence later in other parts of Loki's story, begins its turning with something softer, the withdrawal of hospitality, the refusal to keep pretending. Hospitality is warmth plus rules. When the warmth remains, but the rules change, you feel it immediately. The same fire burns, but the room is colder. The same cups exist, but the serving becomes mechanical. The same faces are present, but they stop being friendly surfaces and become guarded walls. And then, quietly, the hall demands an ending. Not a moral ending, not a satisfying ending, just an ending that restores the performance. The gods want their feast back. The host wants his hall back. The social glue wants to reharden. Loki, having softened it, becomes the thing that must be removed so it can set. So imagine the moment when the group decides, not with a shout, but with a collective tightening. Imagine Loki's last lines landing into a room that no longer catches them. They fall to the floor like ash. Imagine the way the fire pops once, as if punctuating nothing at all. Imagine someone finally standing, not as a dramatic hero, but as someone who has had enough of listening. Imagine the slight scrape of wood as benches shift. These are small sounds, and small sounds, in a suddenly quiet hall, feel enormous. Now drift into the final mood of this section, the bedtime oath hidden inside a loud myth. Hold one gentle lesson without gripping it too hard. Truth said with malice can still sound like truth, and that is why it hurts. It's not the truth that wounds by itself. It's the intention behind it, the way it's delivered, the timing, the audience. A truth whispered privately can be care. The same truth announced publicly can be a weapon. Loki knows this. That's why his voice stays calm. Calmness makes the weapon cleaner. And if you want to keep the lesson in one jar and the myth in another, you can. Keep the myth in the jar with horn cups and firelight and smoke. Keep the lesson in the other jar, the one you set on a shelf for ordinary days. Words have weight and rooms remember them. Social spaces are not just places. They are agreements. When someone breaks the agreement, everyone feels the break, even if they pretend not to. And when everyone decides to restore the agreement, it often happens quietly with glances and pauses and the subtle movement of people toward a door. So let the hall settle into that quiet. Let the hearth still burn, because hearths are stubborn. Let the air cool slightly, not because the fire is weaker, but because the mood has changed shape. Let the horn cup be set down carefully, as if noise itself is now suspicious. Let the smoke thin, as if the hall is trying to clear its head. And let the story drift right up to the edge of the moment when words become consequences without stepping over it too sharply. Because the night doesn't need to conclude to feel heavy. It only needs to keep moving softly toward its next inevitable beat. The benches creak, the fire breathes, the cups wait. The hall holds its memory like a warm stone in its palm. And somewhere in the background, the idea remains quiet, persistent, almost sleepy that a feast is not only food. It is the performance of stability. And stability, like a candle flame, can be disturbed by something as small as a breath. It's a curious thing, when you think about it slowly, that a mirror can feel rude without making a sound. It just hangs there. It reflects. It doesn't even choose its subject. And yet, if you catch yourself in it at the wrong angle, in the wrong light, you can feel personally attacked by a piece of polished surface that has never met you. That is the gentle, uncomfortable magic Loki brings into Jyr's Hall in Lokasenna. He isn't only throwing insults like pebbles. He is holding up a mirror and letting everyone notice the little smudges they were hoping would stay invisible in firelight. If you're listening from somewhere warm, somewhere quiet, let that warmth stay with you. Let the story move like a slow stream, no sharp turns. And if you're still awake in a few minutes, you can always subscribe. Or don't. I'll never know, and the ravens aren't taking attendance. The gods, for all their divine habits, aren't especially organized about paperwork. They have many virtues, but they do not run a modern office. Now picture the hall again, not as a battlefield, but as a room that wants to believe in itself. The hearth still burns. The horn cups still exist. The benches still creak when someone shifts, because even gods need to get comfortable, and comfort is a very physical thing, and yet the mood has changed from earlier. You can feel it in the way people hold their cups a little closer, as if the drink is a shield. You can feel it in the way laughter becomes cautious, like a dog that wants to bark but checks the room first. Loki's presence has turned the hall into a place where everyone is suddenly aware of how they appear. That awareness is the real weapon. Loki's words sting, but the deeper effect is that they make the gods watch themselves. When people say Loki is attacking, they aren't wrong, but it's also true that he's revealing. His insults are specific enough to feel like accusations, and accusations have a strange talent. They make you imagine the evidence, even when you don't want to. A vague insult can be shrugged off. A detailed one makes the mind do work. It makes the listener quietly scan their own memory, their own reputation, their own little corners of shame. Loki doesn't only speak to the room. He speaks to the private mental rooms inside each god, where they keep the things they don't display. There is a tradition behind this too, if you want a mildly strange little fact to rest on like a pillow. The verbal sparring in Lokasenna fits into something scholars call flighting, an insult contest, that shows up in various Germanic and Norse contexts. It's a kind of performance where words are treated like blows, but also like entertainment, like sport. The odd part is that it relies on a shared agreement. We will all stay in the room and treat this as a game. Loki breaks the agreement by making the game feel too real. He pushes past playful rudeness into something more intimate and more costly. He takes the fun structure and fills it with uncomfortable content, like someone turning a party playlist into a playlist of everyone's most embarrassing voice memos. And because the hall is a social machine, that shift matters. Jyr's feast isn't only food and drink, it's a demonstration of order. The gods sit as if the world is stable, and stability is the thing they like to wear in public. Loki's mirror doesn't show stability, it shows the seams. It shows the little stitches where the costume was repaired. It shows that pride can be loud because it's scared, and honor can be strict because it's fragile. And in a room full of God's beings who are supposed to be the model of power fragility is almost indecent. Not because it is rare, but because it is too familiar. You can even imagine the mirror effect in the smallest gestures. A god hears an accusation and adjusts their posture. Not dramatically, just enough to look more dignified, as if dignity can be retied like a scarf. Someone clears their throat, which is funny in a sleepy way because clearing a throat is such a human move, and it doesn't become less human just because you are immortal. Someone's fingers tighten around a cup. Someone suddenly remembers a noble deed and tries to feel it on the inside like armor. Loki's insults don't simply land. They cause tiny repairs and adjustments all over the room, like a draft making a whole row of candles lean. And Loki, the trickster, understands something about hypocrisy that is both sharp and boringly practical. Hypocrisy is the easiest crack to widen in a room full of pride. If people were openly messy, openly imperfect, openly honest about their contradictions, there would be less leverage. But the gods aren't built for that kind of casual honesty. Their identities are reputations. Their reputations are stories. Their stories are currency. So Loki points at the gap between what they claim and what they do, and the gap starts to glow in everyone's mind like an ember you can't see. This is why the myth feels like a mirror, even for listeners who are not gods. And this is a very gentle modern analogy you can let pass through without clinging to it. Think of a group chat where everyone pretends to be reasonable, and then someone scrolls up and quotes an old message. Suddenly the room changes. The past becomes present. The performance becomes awkward. Loki is basically quoting receipts at a feast, which is, admittedly, not the most relaxing dinner etiquette, but it is effective. It turns a warm room into a room where everyone is aware of the archive. In Lokasenna, the gods prefer their stories to remain intact. They like the version of themselves that fits on a runestone or in a praise poem. They like the clean outline. Loki supplies the footnotes. He supplies the inconvenient details. He supplies the version of the story where the hero is tired. The goddess is resentful. The brave one is compromised. The wise one is petty. And what makes this especially corrosive is that he doesn't deliver it with explosive emotion. He delivers it calmly, as if reading names from a list, as if stating the weather. Calmness makes the mirror clearer. Calmness keeps the listener from dismissing it as just anger. There's also a sleepy irony here. Loki is not a moral teacher. He isn't doing this out of love for truth. He's doing it out of spite, out of grievance, out of appetite for disturbance. And yet, even spite can sometimes carry accurate information, like a rude person accidentally giving you the correct directions. You didn't enjoy the tone, but you arrive at the right street anyway. Loki's cruelty becomes a test, not because he is noble, but because the gods' response reveals what they value most. How strong is their honor when it's questioned out loud? How sturdy is their social glue when someone points at the bubble in it? It's tempting to imagine that gods, being gods, would respond with perfect confidence. But the more perfect a society pretends to be, the more violent its reaction to exposure becomes. That's not only a Norse myth thing, that's a people in a room thing. If you've ever watched a group defend its image, you know how quickly the mood can harden. At first there is laughter, then there is denial, then there is anger, then there is something colder, the desire to remove the person who is causing the discomfort. Loki is pulling the thread that unravels the tapestry, and the god's instinct is to stop his fingers, not to examine the tapestry. And this is where the mirror idea becomes quietly haunting. A mirror doesn't create flaws, it reveals them. That is why it feels so unfair. The gods would like to believe Loki is inventing things, because invention is easier to punish than revelation. If Loki were simply lying, the solution would be simple: dismiss him. But Loki's power in this scene comes from the way his accusations feel plausible enough to make the room nervous. He doesn't need to prove every detail. He only needs to make the gods feel the possibility of being seen. Being seen is expensive, it costs comfort, it costs control. It costs the ability to sit in a warm hall and enjoy the ordinary rhythm of serving and song. And the cost isn't paid only by the target of the insult. It's paid by the whole room, because the whole room is implicated in the social order. If one reputation falls, other reputations wobble. If one god is revealed as less noble, what does that say about the standards of nobility? Loki is not only insulting individuals, he is threatening the shared illusion that makes the group feel stable. So the hall becomes a place where everyone is watching everyone. This is a surprisingly mundane kind of tension. It's not the tension of swords, it's the tension of glances. It's the tension of wondering who will speak next, and what side their words will place them on. It's the tension of realizing that even silence can be interpreted. Loki weaponizes the room's interpretive habits. If someone protests too loudly, it sounds defensive. If someone stays silent, it looks like agreement. If someone laughs, it sounds forced. If someone doesn't laugh, it looks grim. Every response becomes evidence, and evidence is exhausting. Here's another oddly specific detail you can let float by. In an insult contest, it's not only what is said that matters. It's who remains composed. Composure is a kind of status. Loki tries to keep his composure because composure makes him look in control, and control makes his words feel heavier. The gods try to keep their composure because composure preserves dignity. So the hall fills with people acting calm while feeling exposed, which is one of the most common human performances in history. We could probably carve it into stone. Here lies a person who was fine and was also not fine. It's also worth noticing, softly, that Loki himself is a mirror in more than one way. Loki is the figure who changes shape, changes role, changes allegiance. He slips between categories. That slipperiness makes him the perfect commentator, because he doesn't have to protect a single stable identity. The gods, in contrast, are heavily branded. Thor must be Thor, Odin must be Odin, Freya must be Freya. Loki can be Loki in 100 forms, which means he has less to lose socially, and that freedom makes him dangerous. He is what happens when someone in a tightly managed society stops caring about being liked. But even Loki has a reason, and the myth invites you, without demanding you, to consider it. Loki arrives uninvited, but he arrives with memory. Memory is its own kind of weapon. He remembers slights that others dismiss. He remembers who laughed when they shouldn't have. He remembers who promised something in a casual tone and never delivered. He carries grievance like a hidden blade, and the blade is sharpened not only by anger, but by time. Time makes grievances feel justified. Time lets the mind rehearse. Time adds details. Time adds imagined dialogues where you finally say the perfect line. Loki is basically living inside a long, slow rehearsal, and Jyr's Hall becomes his stage for the performance he's been practicing. This is where the mirror can be seen as the trickster's mirror specifically. Loki reflects what the gods prefer not to see about themselves, but he also reflects something about social perfection itself. A society that insists on its own nobility invites the trickster. It practically creates the role. If everyone is required to be honorable, someone will eventually point out where honor becomes performance. If everyone is required to be brave, someone will eventually point out where bravery is selective. Loki's cruelty is ugly, yes, but it is also a symptom. He appears where the surface is too polished, because polished surfaces make scratches more visible. And now, to keep the tone sleepy, let's drift into the sensory world again, where the mirror becomes almost literal. The firelight in a hall is already a kind of mirror. It makes shiny things shine. It makes eyes glitter. It turns liquid into reflective surfaces. Mead in a cup catches light. Sweat on a brow catches light. The polished rim of a horn cup catches light. Even a small knife at a belt catches light. Everything reflected in the room becomes a tiny mirror, and the room becomes full of little places where you can see yourself if you look. Loki doesn't need to hang a mirror on the wall. The hall provides enough surfaces. Imagine someone staring into their drink for a moment too long, as if hoping the mead will offer a more flattering version of their face. Imagine the way the liquid trembles slightly when the bench shifts. Imagine the smell of smoke mixing with sweetness, and how that smell can make a memory feel closer than it is. Imagine the warmth of the hearth on your hands, and the way warmth can make you sleepy even when the room is tense. The body doesn't always cooperate with the drama of the mind. The body says, "This is warm, this is late, this is a good time to be quiet." The mind says, "But my reputation." The body says, "Yes, yes, reputation. Have you tried blinking slowly?" And because we're in a bedtime version of this myth, we can let the body win for a moment. Let the scene feel slow. Let Loki's words be more like a steady drip than a storm. Let the god's discomfort be more like an itch than a wound. An itch can be maddening, but it's also repetitive, and repetition is oddly soothing when you're trying to fall asleep. Loki repeats the pattern: name, accusation, reaction, silence, another name. The room repeats its pattern: tighten, glance, adjust, hold breath, release breath. The feast repeats its stubborn pattern. Cups exist, fire burns, smoke rises. Even a disruptive ritual tries to remain a ritual. There's a gentle, slightly absurd thought you can hold here. If the gods really wanted to win this, they could simply refuse to be embarrassed. Embarrassment is a kind of permission. But refusing embarrassment is hard because embarrassment is social pain, and social pain is ancient. It's older than a lot of weapons. It's the feeling of being out of place in the group. It's the feeling of being seen as less than what you claim. And that feeling is powerful enough that even gods respond to it like animals. They bristle, they defend, they try to restore hierarchy. Loki knows exactly which nerve he's touching. So why does Loki do it in the quiet emotional logic of the scene? Partly because he is angry, partly because he is bored, partly because he wants to remind the room that inclusion is conditional. He was not invited, and he makes everyone feel the discomfort of that boundary. If you can exclude me, his behavior suggests, I can exclude your comfort. It's petty, yes. It's also strangely consistent. Loki's mirror doesn't only reflect hypocrisy, it reflects the consequences of social exclusion. It says, in effect, if I don't get to participate in your pleasant performance, I can turn your performance into something else. And the more the gods react, the more the mirror proves its point. A mirror can't be argued with. You can only cover it, smash it, or look away. The gods start to realize that debating Loki is like debating a reflection. You can insist your face isn't tired, but the reflection keeps showing the tiredness. You can insist your virtue is intact, but the reflection keeps showing the crack. Loki doesn't need to win an argument. He only needs to keep the mirror uncovered long enough for the room to become uncomfortable with what it sees. Now let the scene soften, not into resolution, but into the steady understanding that this is a myth about social order. The fear under the anger is real. The god's anger isn't only offended dignity. It's the fear that order depends on shared stories staying intact. If the hall accepts Loki's words even slightly, the social glue starts to melt. And if the social glue melts, the feast becomes just a room with food, not a performance of stability. That might sound minor, but it's not minor to a society that builds itself on ritual. Ritual is how you keep the universe from feeling like chaos. Ritual is how you remind yourself that you belong. Loki threatens ritual by making everyone feel that belonging can be questioned. So, in this part of the story, Loki is the mirror and the hall is the face. The hall wants to look composed. The hall wants to look noble. The hall wants to look stable. Loki shows the face sweating slightly under the makeup. Loki shows the eyes darting toward exits. Loki shows the way dignity can become a tight collar. He shows that even in a room of gods, the deepest fear is not physical harm, it's social unraveling. Let that idea rest without gripping it. You don't need to solve it. You don't need to judge Loki or excuse him. You can simply notice the shape of it, the way you might notice the shape of smoke rising and dispersing. The hall, for all its firelight and cups, is a container for a story the gods tell about themselves. Loki arrives and makes the container feel fragile. He does it with words, yes, but more importantly with attention. He forces attention onto things the gods prefer to keep in shadow. And attention is a kind of heat. It warms what it touches. It exposes what it touches. It makes hiding harder. So let the fire remain steady in your imagination. Let the horn cup sit heavy in hands. Let the room feel warm but not safe, like a blanket that covers you but doesn't erase the world. Let Loki's calm voice drift through the hall like smoke, not rushing, not resolving, simply continuing. Let the gods sit in their polished reputations and feel, for a long moment, what it is like to be reflected back at themselves. And as you settle, hold one small, quiet thought. Sometimes the most disruptive person in a room is not the one who raises their voice, but the one who refuses to let the room keep its comfortable story. The trickster's mirror doesn't shout. It doesn't chase. It simply stays uncovered, reflecting until the hall has to decide what matters more, the image or the truth of what's underneath. Now let the image soften at the edges. Let the details blur just slightly in the way they do when you're getting sleepy. The smoke thins, the fire breathes, the benches creak quietly, like the hall is shifting in its sleep. Loki's words continue, but they feel farther away, like a conversation in another room that you no longer need to follow. The mirror remains where it is, doing nothing, revealing everything, and waiting patiently, boringly, for the next person who dares to look. Anger is a loud mask, but it is rarely the real face underneath. If you listen to a room carefully, especially a room that insists it is calm, you can sometimes hear the softer thing that anger is trying to cover. In Jyr's hall, in the middle of Lokasenna, the god's outrage has that covered sound. It's sharp on the surface, yes, like a cup placed down too hard, like a laugh that snaps instead of landing gently. But underneath it, if you let your attention drift slowly, there's something smaller and steadier, like the low hum beneath the hearth. It's fear, not the dramatic kind. Not the kind with monsters, the practical kind. The kind that worries the room might not hold together the way it is supposed to. If you're listening from somewhere quiet, let that quiet stay. If you're listening from somewhere not quiet, then just imagine a quiet place anyway, because imagination is free and the gods never send an invoice. And if you're still awake later, you can subscribe or don't. The story will keep going either way. The hall will keep being a hall. The cups will keep being cups. The only thing that changes is whether you feel like returning. Now, picture the hall as it was meant to be. A feast is not only eating. It is choreography. There are roles. There's timing. There are polite little rhythms that make people feel safe without anyone announcing out loud, "Now you may feel safe." There's the steady passing of horns, the unspoken agreement about who speaks when, the way people look toward the host at small moments, like planets orbiting a warm center. Even the smoke has a rhythm, rising, thinning, folding back into itself. A room like that is a spell made of habits. It doesn't look like magic because it looks like normal social life, but it functions like magic. It keeps the chaos outside. And in Norse myth, chaos is never far away. The world is built with edges that matter. There are borders that keep things separated. Gods here, giants there, order here, wilderness there. Hearth here, cold dark out there. A hall, warmed by firelight, becomes a miniature version of that order. It says, without saying, inside this border, we are ourselves. Inside this border, the rules work. Inside this border, we can relax. That's why feasts are so important. They aren't just pleasure, they're maintenance. They're a small repair to the idea that the world makes sense. So when Loki enters and begins, calmly, like someone reading names from a list, he isn't only insulting individual gods. He's scratching at the protective surface of the room itself. And that is why the god's anger starts to feel urgent. Anger is what you put on when you need to move quickly, when you need to defend something without pausing to explain what it is you are defending. If someone points out hypocrisy or calls out a hidden story, the first instinct isn't always to respond thoughtfully. The first instinct is to stop the pointing, to stop the revealing, to restore the old rhythm before the new rhythm becomes normal. The fear under the anger is not simply fear of being embarrassed, it's fear of being redefined. Reputation in these myths is not a decorative thing, it is structure. It is social architecture, and social architecture is what keeps everyone from falling into the cold water outside the hall. Loki understands that. He doesn't need to threaten anyone with a sword. He threatens with a wobble. He threatens with the possibility that the story holding the room together will start to loosen at the corners. There's a very sleepy, oddly specific fact that fits here like a small stone you can turn over in your mind. In Norse society, oaths mattered in a way that is hard to feel in modern life because we've outsourced so much of our trust to paperwork and screens and passwords. In the older world, the promise itself was infrastructure. People swore on rings, on sacred objects, on honor that was meant to outlive the moment. You didn't only keep promises because it was polite. You kept them because breaking them cracked the social world. Loki's accusations, even when they are rude, often land in this territory who has been faithful, who has been honest, who has done what they claim. He is tugging at oaths and reputations, and the gods feel that tug as a threat to the hall's invisible scaffolding. So the god's anger begins to show its true shape. It isn't only offended dignity, it's a protective reaction. It's the room's immune system. A community, even a divine one, tends to react to disruption like a body reacts to splinters. First it tries to push the splinter out, then it inflames. Then it tightens around the wound. It does not stop to admire the splinter's logic. Loki, from the god's point of view, is a splinter with excellent vocabulary. And what makes fear so effective is that it spreads quietly. One god's discomfort becomes another god's caution. One god's forced laugh becomes another god's silence. The hall begins to behave like a room that knows it is being watched, even though there is no outside audience. That's the strange part. Reputation isn't only for strangers, it's for each other. The gods are the audience to their own performance. They look at each other and see reflections. They hear Loki's words and imagine the story traveling, and the travel itself is frightening, not because the hall has a newsletter, but because gossip is essentially a myth in motion. It moves faster than comfort. Imagine, in a soft, slow way, how anger sits in the body, a tightening jaw, a hotter face, a cup held too firmly, a posture that tries to look tall. Now imagine what fear does beneath that. A shallow breath, a quick scan of the room, a sense of exit points, the faint urge to restore normalcy, to make the moment stop being this moment. The god's anger is loud enough to look like strength, but the fear underneath is the true force driving them toward action because fear cares about consequences. Fear cares about what happens next if the room accepts Loki's words even slightly. Because that's the key. The gods are not only reacting to Loki, they are reacting to the idea that Loki might be believed. A lie can be dismissed. A truth that threatens the group is more dangerous because truth has allies. Truth doesn't need volume, it needs recognition. Loki's words, even when they are cruel, are shaped to produce recognition. They are specific. They are pointed. They make the mind imagine the hidden scene behind the public face. And once the mind imagines, it can't unimagine quite as easily. This is why the response becomes urgent. Restore silence, restore hierarchy, restore the old rhythm. The old rhythm is not only a preference, it's a defense. It's the way the gods keep the hall from becoming a court, from becoming a place where every glance is evidence. In a hall, a glance should be nothing. In a court, a glance is a statement. Loki is turning the feast into a trial without a judge, and the gods, being very ancient creatures of status and story, know that a trial changes everything. Once a room becomes a room of judgment, it does not easily return to being a room of pleasure. There's a quietly absurd thing about this too, that can make you smile without waking you up. Gods have access to enormous powers. They wrestle giants. They travel between worlds. They own magical objects. And yet what rattles them here is a social situation. It's a dinner party going wrong. It's someone saying the wrong thing in the wrong tone in the wrong room, which is honestly extremely relatable for immortal beings. It suggests that no matter how impressive your cosmic resume is, you can still be undone by awkwardness and exposure. Now, if you let yourself drift deeper into the logic of fear, you can see why Loki's presence feels so dangerous, even beyond the insults. Loki is a boundary crosser. He slips between categories. He changes shapes. He moves between gods and giants and other forms. In a world built on borders, someone who ignores borders is inherently unsettling. Because borders are what make the story feel stable. Borders are what keep the hall from being the wilderness. Borders are what keep the gods from being the giants. Loki, in this moment, is not only saying things, he is demonstrating that the border of politeness can be crossed, and if that border can be crossed, maybe other borders can be crossed too. Fear loves slippery slopes, and Loki is basically a slippery slope wearing a smile. If one person can speak like this in Jyr's Hall, what does that mean about the hall's authority? If the host cannot keep order, what does that mean about hospitality itself? If the gods cannot maintain dignity in a feast, how will they maintain dignity anywhere? Small failures become symbolic. A cracked cup makes you wonder about all the cups. A disrupted toast makes you wonder about all the toasts. Loki's words are not only contempt, they are disruption, and disruption is contagious. This is where you can feel the myth doing something very human. It shows that order depends on shared agreement, and shared agreement depends on people not pushing too hard on the weak points. Loki pushes. The gods' fear is the fear of realizing how much of their stability is voluntary. Not voluntary in a cheerful way, but voluntary in the way that a bridge is voluntary. Everyone agrees to trust it until they don't. Once doubt appears, the bridge feels shakier even if the structure hasn't changed. Loki is injecting doubt into the room, and doubt makes people grip their cups tighter. So the anger starts to look like policing, not in the modern bureaucratic sense, but in the basic social sense. A group trying to enforce its own story. The gods try to contain Loki, not only because they dislike him, but because containment restores the illusion that the room is still controlled. A feast is a performance of stability, and stability is what the gods in this scene need more than they need honesty. That is the uncomfortable truth beneath their anger. They are not defending virtue as much as they are defending the image of virtue. They are defending the story that keeps them seated confidently on their benches. And Loki, hearing their anger, can almost relax into it, because anger confirms fear. Anger proves he has touched something important, A calm room would be a failure for Loki. A room that erupts is a success. The more the gods react, the more the hall becomes what Loki wants it to be. Not a comfortable container, but a revealed stage where the gods have to show what they do when their image is threatened. You can also notice how fear in groups tends to look for a target. It wants a single thing to blame because blame is easier than complexity. Loki offers himself as a target, and that is part of the strange structure of this myth. Loki is both the cause of disruption and the convenient container for the group as anxiety. If they can remove Loki, perhaps the room will feel stable again. That's the dream fear offers: remove the problem, restore the old life. It's not always true, but it's soothing to believe. It's a bedtime thought in a way: just remove the noise and the room will be quiet. But the myth also suggests something else, gently, without shouting it. Once words have been said, the room is changed. Even if Loki leaves, the memory stays. A feast remembers every word, because people remember what embarrassed them. People remember what exposed them. People remember who defended whom and who stayed silent. The social glue doesn't melt all at once, but it softens. It becomes something you can press a finger into. The fear under the anger isn't only fear of Loki. It's fear that the room will never be exactly the same again. That fear is why the gods begin to lean toward consequences. Debate has failed. Humor has failed. Polite dismissal has failed. Now the room wants containment. The room wants action because action is a kind of punctuation. Action says, this is where it stops. Action pretends to close the loop. And even thinking about action can be oddly calming to a frightened group because it makes the future feel manageable. Fear hates open-endedness. It hates the sense that the scene could continue indefinitely. And yet, for you, listening slowly, the open-endedness can be soothing. You are not in the hall. You don't have to protect a reputation. You don't have to maintain a divine hierarchy. You can simply observe the pattern: order, disruption, fear, anger, attempted restoration. It's a rhythm that repeats in many rooms, in many centuries, in many small human feasts where nobody is mortal, but everyone still wants to look composed. So let the hall be warm again in your imagination. Let the hearth make it steady, boring light. Let the smoke drift up and thin out. Let the gods sit with their cups and their carefully arranged selves. Let Loki's voice be present, but not sharp in your ears, more like a distant conversation you don't need to answer. And let the fear under the anger feel like what it really is: a quiet recognition that stability is a performance, and that performances depend on everyone agreeing not to interrupt too hard. If you hold that thought gently, it becomes almost comforting. It means the world's order, whether divine or ordinary, is made of small habits, small courtesies, small agreements. It is fragile, yes, but it is also constantly repaired. Every toast is a repair. Every shared laugh is a repair. Every moment of pretending things are fine is, in its own way, a stitch in the social fabric. Loki pulls at the stitches. The gods rush to sew. Fear drives their hands. Anger is the needle they show the room. And now, without concluding, without locking the story into a neat moral, just let the scene drift. Let the urgency soften at the edges. Let the hall's sounds become muffled, as if you're hearing them through a wall. Let the idea of fear under anger settle into the background like embers settling in ash. The feast continues, but in that slow, sleepy way where continuing doesn't feel like progress. It just feels like time passing. The horns sit heavy. The fire breathes. The room tries, again and again, to restore the old rhythm because the old rhythm is the closest thing they have to peace. Eventually, a room gets tired of being a room full of opinions. It tries to become a room full of decisions. You can feel the shift before anyone says anything dramatic, because drama is loud, and this is quieter than that. It's the kind of quiet where people stop performing their reactions and start calculating them. A horn cup that used to be lifted with a casual hand is lifted more carefully, as if the weight has changed. A laugh that used to come out on its own now asks permission from the throat first. Even the fire seems to listen, and fires are not famous for their attention span. In Jeer's Hall, the air goes from "we are enduring this" to "we are ending this," and the difference is subtle, like the difference between a song and the moment after. The song when everyone suddenly remembers they have bodies and responsibilities. It isn't that the gods suddenly grow brave. It's more like they grow practical. There is a limit to how long you can argue with a person who is not trying to be persuaded. Loki is not there to learn. He is there to say. And the gods, who usually enjoy being said about in flattering ways, discover the exhausting truth that you cannot out-toast an insult if the insult is stubborn enough. Debate fails, not because nobody has clever words. Gods have been collecting clever words for centuries, but because clever words require a shared goal. A debate only works when both sides want the same thing, like clarity or peace, or at least a sense of fair play. Loki wants imbalance. Loki wants the room to wobble. So every answer becomes another step in his dance, and the gods start to realize they're helping him keep time. That's when threat begins to replace argument. Not the cinematic kind of threat, not a sword flashing in firelight. More like a social muscle tightening. More like the feeling you get when someone stands a little too close in a hallway and you understand, without being told, that you should move. The gods' voices change. Not louder, necessarily. Sometimes threats are quieter because they want to sound inevitable, like weather. A threat is the room saying, "We have other tools," and it says it with the calmness of a person who is tired of explaining. Loki, who has spent a lifetime being difficult in creative ways, recognizes this tone. It is the tone people use when they are done being embarrassed and are ready to be effective. There's something oddly mundane about it, and that mundanity makes it feel even more real. These are divine beings, yes, but they are also members of a community that wants to keep functioning. A community, even an immortal one, cannot live in permanent chaos without getting sleepy in a bad way. The hall is not meant to be a battlefield. It is meant to be a place where reputations are polished, where hospitality is performed, where the world feels held together by courtesy. Loki has scratched through the polish and made everyone stare at the raw wood underneath. Now the group wants the polish back, even if it has to apply it with pressure. If you listen softly to the logic of it, you can almost hear the internal conversation in the hall. Not spoken, but shared. The gods are thinking, if we allow this, what happens next? And in a world that takes stories seriously, what happens next is not a small question. Stories are not decorations here. Stories are scaffolding. Stories are the reason certain people get to sit in certain seats. Stories are the reason the hall feels safe. Loki is trying to prove that the scaffolding is thin, and thin scaffolding makes everyone nervous, because nobody wants to be the one who falls first. So they begin to treat Loki's speech the way you treat a fire that has started to spread. First you try to smother it politely, then you try to stamp it out, then you start moving things away from it so it has less to consume. That is what containment looks like in a feast. Not just tell him to stop, but stop giving him room. Stop giving him attention. Stop giving him the center. Turn your body slightly. Move the focus. Shift the rhythm back toward the host. In a room, power is partly physical. It's where people look, where they lean, who they leave space for. Loki has been taking space with his words. Now the room wants to shrink that space. It's almost funny, in a sleepy way, that one of the oldest forms of conflict resolution is essentially rearranging who is allowed to speak at dinner. You can imagine the gods as a group chat that has finally decided to mute someone. Not block, just mute. Not forever, necessarily. Just long enough for everyone to remember what silence feels like. And if you've ever been in a social situation where someone won't stop, You know how luxurious silence can seem? Silence becomes a goal, not because it is truth, but because it is relief. But Loki is not easy to mute. Loki is not even easy to ignore. He has the talent, irritatingly, of being specific. Specificity sticks. You, he implies, and the thing you did. And suddenly, you can't think about anything else. A vague insult is like smoke. It drifts. A specific insult is like ash. It lands, so the gods who have tried to answer him now try to stop him. And stopping someone in a myth rarely looks gentle, even when everyone wishes it could be. Still, the hall tries. It tries in the way a tired person tries to be patient. It tries by leaning on rules. Hospitality has rules. A feast has rules. There are traditions about guests and hosts and conduct. The irony is that Loki, who has been accusing everyone else of hypocrisy, is now about to be handled through the very social order he is mocking. The gods, in their anger, may sound emotional, but their response is institutional. They are reaching for the ancient because this is how it is done. That makes communities feel sturdy. Even gods like a procedure. Procedures are comforting. Procedures are the lullabies of power. You follow the steps and hope the steps restore the world. There's another small, oddly specific detail you can let your mind play with. In many Old Norse contexts, the act of being declared an outlaw, being pushed outside the law's protection, was not merely punishment. It was a change in reality. It was the community saying, you are no longer inside the circle. The circle is everything. Inside the circle, you have rights, relationships, predictable consequences. Outside the circle, you have none, and anything can happen. In myth, this logic becomes larger. It becomes cosmic. Loki is, in a sense, trying to stand half in and half out of the circle at once. He is inside the hall, using the hall's attention, but he is also behaving like someone who does not accept the hall's rules. Eventually, circles don't like that. They close. So threats become action does not mean everyone suddenly leaps up and starts wrestling in the firelight like an overly energetic sports team. It means the group chooses direction. It means the hall stops being a place of endless words and becomes a place of consequences. That shift can feel cold. Not because the fire goes out, the fire dutifully keeps burning, but because the warmth of the room changes. Warmth is not only temperature. Warmth is permission. Warmth is the sense that you can exist without being judged. In Jyr's Hall, warmth begins to drain away, replaced by a kind of organized chill. The chill of people deciding what they will tolerate. Loki's exit becomes as important as his entrance. That is a very human detail too. We care about how people arrive, yes, but we care even more about how they leave, because leaving is the final impression. Leaving tells the story. Leaving determines whether the disruption becomes a legend or a footnote. Loki entered like a guest and spoke like a prosecutor. Now the question is, does he leave like a guest? Does he get pushed like an intruder? Does he slip away like smoke? The hall wants control over this. Control over the ending, even if the ending is only, he is no longer here. And you can feel, beneath the god's anger, the same fear you were listening to earlier, fear that words can reshape the world. Because in this myth, speech is not just sound. Speech is an act. Speech is a blade with no blood. If a god is publicly shamed, the shame is not contained in the moment. It sticks to the story. It follows them. It becomes part of the mythic record. The gods are not afraid of being hurt physically in this scene. They are afraid of being edited. That's a strange modern analogy, but it fits quietly. Loki is trying to edit the gods' profiles. He is doing the ancient version of posting something that makes everyone look bad, and they are doing the ancient version of trying to take it down before it spreads. The only difference is that the internet here is memory, and memory is harder to delete. Memory has no refresh. Memory just sits there like a cup left on a table, waiting to be noticed again. So the hall, demanding an ending, starts to behave like a hall with rules again. People look toward the host. They look toward Odin, toward those who usually decide. Authority becomes visible. In a calm room, authority can be subtle. In a threatened room, authority has to announce itself through posture and voice and the simple act of saying, "Enough." The gods, who have been caught reacting, now try to lead. They try to reassert that there is a hierarchy, that there is a top and a bottom, that not everyone gets to speak as if they own the room. Loki has been treating the hall as if it belongs to his speech. Now the gods want to remind him that ownership is not the same as attention. This is where the myth whispers its reminder. Speech can be treated like a crime when it threatens the group's image, not because the speech is necessarily false, not because the speech is necessarily unjust, but because groups protect themselves the way bodies protect themselves. If a truth acts like poison in the social bloodstream, the group will call it poison, even if it is technically medicine. Loki's words are medicine with a taste nobody likes. They expose infections. They also make the patient furious. And the patient, being powerful, starts to blame the spoon. There's a sleepy kind of sadness in that. Not dramatic sadness, not the kind that begs you to care. Just the quiet recognition that communities often prefer harmony to honesty, especially when honesty is served without kindness. The gods want stability. Loki wants revelation. Stability wins in the short term because stability holds the chairs up and keeps the fire in the hearth. Revelation, when it is sharp, tends to get punished. That is not a Norse-specific lesson, that is a human one. It's the kind of lesson you can carry into your own life gently, like a warm cup. Choose your truth carefully, and choose your room even more carefully. Still, this is a myth, and myths love consequences. The hall does not remain in this tense, hovering state forever. It begins to move toward action in the way a glacier moves, slow, heavy, certain. People stop trading lines and start trading signals. The room is less interested in winning the argument and more interested in ending the problem. You can imagine the benches creaking as people shift. You can imagine the sound of clothing moving, the small scrape of wood, the horn cups settling into hands that are now steady. You can imagine Loki's voice continuing because Loki rarely stops himself. And you can imagine the hall's patience thinning the way smoke thins when the fire settles. And yet, you can also imagine the weirdness of it. The gods, in their own story, are trying to keep their story intact. They are trying to preserve the version of themselves that feels safe. It's like watching someone carefully arrange a blanket so it covers exactly what they want covered. Loki keeps pulling the blanket down, pointing at the messy bits. The gods keep pulling it back up, pretending the messy bits are not there. At some point, the blanket becomes a tug-of-war, and tug-of-wars rarely end with polite smiles. Loki's exit, then, is not just a physical departure. It is the hall's attempt to restore narrative control. If we can end this scene, the room seems to say, then we can go back to being who we were. This is why endings matter so much in social life. Endings allow people to pretend a moment was contained. They allow people to file it away. If Loki leaves cleanly, the gods can tell themselves they handled it. If Loki is forced out, they can tell themselves they defended the hall. Either way, the room wants a story it can live with. And Loki, being Loki, does not make it easy. His presence is not only his body, it is the echo he leaves behind. Even if he goes, the accusations linger like smoke on clothing. You can air out a hall, but you can't air out a memory. You can drink more, you can laugh louder, you can sing a different song, but somewhere inside each god's mind, a sentence will remain, tucked away like an unpleasant pebble in a shoe. That is the true consequence of words. They travel home with you. So as the hall moves toward action, you can keep your focus on the small, sleepy details rather than the sharpness. Think of the way the firelight turns the carved pillars into something soft. Think of the way the mead smells, sweet and a little too heavy, like a drink designed to make you forget what you shouldn't have heard. Think of the way the horns, those beautiful, ridiculous drinking horns, are both ceremonial and deeply impractical. It's hard to look dignified while drinking from a curved piece of horn, and maybe that's the point. Maybe feasts are meant to remind even gods that they are creatures with mouths and thirst and the occasional spill. And in the middle of that, you could feel the hall's demand. Enough. Enough words. Enough exposure. Enough of Loki making the room into a mirror nobody asked for. The gods don't all respond in the same way, because gods have personalities, and personalities don't dissolve just because someone is being annoying. Some gods want to answer him again. Some want to pretend he isn't there. Some want to be done. But the room as a room begins to unify around the simplest goal: restore the old rhythm. That restoration is not clean. It's not graceful. It's not even guaranteed. But it is attempted, and that attempt is the heart of this scene. A hall is a fragile machine. It runs on courtesy, on timing, on shared beliefs about who matters. Loki has thrown sand into the gears. Now the gods, who are used to being the gears, try to remove the sand without admitting that sand can stop them. If you let your mind drift even further, you can imagine the end of the argument not as a climax, but as a dimming. Voices lowering, the room's attention narrowing, the host's patience becoming a kind of cold politeness, the kind of politeness that is no longer warm, but still controlled. Because control is what the hall wants. Control is the blanket pulled back up. Control is the fire kept in the hearth. Control is the myth telling itself, we are still us, and you can let that be the feeling that carries you forward. The hall trying to contain, trying to close, trying to become a hall again. Not with a loud ending, not with a neat moral, but with the slow, tired movement of a community that wants to keep existing. The cups sit heavy in hands, the smoke thins, the fire breathes. The room leans toward consequences, not because it loves them, but because it craves quiet. And in that craving, everything begins to soften at the edges, as if the scene could continue endlessly, with the hall forever trying to restore its old rhythm again and again and again, until even the memory of the argument becomes just another faint warmth in the dark. There is a strange moment after a loud thing when the world tries to remember how to be ordinary again. The loud thing might still be in the air, like a smell that won't leave your clothes, but the room begins to behave as if it has a morning scheduled. Jeer's hall does not collapse, and it does not burst into flames, and nobody rewrites reality on the spot the way people imagine myths always do. Instead, the hall does something much more familiar and much more sleepy. It settles. It keeps existing. The fire stays in the hearth because fires are loyal to their own small job. The benches remain benches. The pillars remain pillars. The only thing that has changed is the texture of the silence. And silence has many textures if you let yourself listen closely. You can picture it as the softest kind of reset. Horn cups, which a moment ago were being lifted with a brave sort of cheer, begin to rest on the table again, one by one, like birds landing after a disturbance. Someone's fingers keep circling the rim of a cup, even though they are not drinking anymore, as if the hand needs to do something repetitive to reassure the mind. A few drops of mead cling to the inside of the horn, sliding slowly, making their own tiny, careful journey. It's not dramatic. It's almost silly, the idea that divine arguments can end with leftover beverage. But that is the charm of a feast and a myth. The cosmic and the practical share the same table. The room feels colder, not because the fire has changed, but because people have changed their faces. Not the big faces, the ones you notice in portraits or statues, the small faces. The ones that appear when somebody is tired, when they stop performing social ease and start wearing their true expression, which is usually something like, I want to go home. It's a very modern feeling for an ancient hall. There are no phones here, no notifications, no glowing screens to scroll through in awkward silence. Instead, there is the crackle of the hearth, the faint shift of bodies, and the long, slow realization that everyone will remember this tomorrow. And in a culture that treats words seriously, tomorrow is not just a day. It's the beginning of a story, because that is the odd curse of a feast. It is supposed to be temporary. You gather, you drink, you speak, you laugh, and then you go back to life as usual. Your head slightly heavy, your heart slightly warmer. But when a feast goes wrong, it becomes permanent in a different way. It sticks. You can leave the hall, but the hall follows you, like the faint smell of smoke that catches in your hair. Loki's words have done that particular kind of damage, the kind that does not need violence because it uses memory. And memory is the one thing even gods can't just simply toss into the fire and pretend it never existed. So the room does what rooms do when they've been embarrassed. It tries to act normal on purpose. Someone coughs, as if coughing could clear not only the throat, but also the atmosphere. Someone comments on the mead, perhaps too brightly, perhaps with the forced cheer of a person complimenting a meal during an argument, just to prove they still have manners. The hosty jeer, the patient keeper of the hall, might move as if he is restoring the rhythm with his hands, like a person smoothing wrinkled cloth. There is a kind of domestic magic in hosting, even for a sea giant. Hosting is the art of pretending that your space is safe, no matter what has been said in it. It is a very exhausting art, and it is one reason hosts deserve more mythic respect than they usually get. And somewhere in that settling silence, the absurdity returns, gently, because absurdity is often what keeps people from feeling too much. You can imagine a god noticing a spill on the table and thinking, with a tired mind, even humiliation is sticky. You can imagine someone realizing they have been gripping their horn cups so tightly that their fingers ache, and then feeling slightly embarrassed about being embarrassed. You can imagine the hall's servants if you picture any quietly deciding that tonight, as cleanup will include not only crumbs and soot, but also the delicate task of cleaning up the mood, which is not a real chore, but feels like one anyway. It is tempting in stories to turn this into a moral, to say, and thus the gods learned, or, and thus Loki was punished, or, and thus the hall was never the same. But bedtime stories do not need to be sharp like that. Bedtime stories can be softer. They can simply notice. They can simply watch the way a loud myth becomes quiet again. Not because it is resolved, but because everyone gets tired. And there is a specific tiredness that comes from being witnessed in an unflattering way. Loki has been doing a kind of unwanted photography with his words, snapping pictures no one consented to, holding them up for the whole room. Now the gods are left with the feeling that their images have been altered in public. In modern life, you might call it a reputation problem. In the hall, it's a deeper discomfort because reputation is not just social, it's almost structural. It decides who sits where. It decides who speaks and who is believed. Loki has poked holes in that structure, and now everyone is quietly checking whether the ceiling is still stable. The bedtime oath of this myth is not spoken aloud like a ritual. It is more like an agreement that forms in the exhausted air. The oath is, we will not talk about this too loudly right now. We will not give it more oxygen. We will not let it become the whole feast. We will fold it into the dark the way you fold a blanket over a mess on the floor when you read too tired to clean properly. It is not denial, exactly. It is pacing. It is the human instinct, yes, even among gods, to delay the emotional processing until daylight, when everything feels slightly easier to handle. And so the hall begins its slow drift toward closure without ever feeling closed. People shift as if they are preparing to leave, but leaving is not immediate, because leaving is its own social choreography. You cannot simply stand up and vanish without creating another story. You have to choose a moment. You have to find a gap in the silence that feels acceptable. You have to let your horn cup sit on the table with the right amount of care, as if your hand is making an argument on your behalf. I am calm. I am dignified. I am not shattered by this. The horn cup becomes a tool of performance again, a quiet prop, a way of saying, I am still myself. The funniest part, softly funny, not loud, is that a horn cup is an inconvenient object. It rolls if you set it down wrong. It doesn't stack. It doesn't have a flat base in the way a sensible cup would. It is the kind of design choice you make when you care more about symbolism than ease. And that is exactly the type of culture a myth loves. A culture where the objects are slightly impractical because the objects are part of the story. Tonight, that impracticality becomes almost comforting. It forces everyone to move slowly. It forces careful hands. It forces attention to something that is not Loki's words. If you are concentrating on not spilling mead from a curved horn, you have less mental space for shame. Sometimes an awkward cup is a form of therapy. You might also notice, if you stay in this sleepy frame, that the hall itself is a character here. Jyr's hall is warm, yes, but it is also watchful. A hall remembers, wood remembers. Smoke stains remember. If you spend enough time in a place, you can feel the way it holds on to what happened. The next time the gods gather here, the fire will be in the same hearth, but the air will feel slightly different, and everyone will pretend not to notice. That is how memory behaves in physical spaces. It becomes part of the furniture. The bench where someone sat during an insult becomes that bench, privately, in someone's mind. The corner where laughter died becomes a corner people avoid without knowing why. And then there is Loki himself, lingering like an aftertaste. Whether he is still in the hall or already gone, the effect is similar. Loki's presence is less about location and more about the way people's minds now anticipate him. After a night like this, the hall is never entirely Loki-free, because everyone has learned how Loki can enter, not just through the door, but through thought. Someone will remember a line, someone will replay it, someone will wonder if the accusation was true, or partly true, or true in a way that doesn't matter but still stings. That wondering is a quiet torment. It is also strangely boring in the best bedtime sense because it is repetitive. It loops, it goes nowhere. It becomes the mind's slow rocking motion, like the sea outside the hall, which keeps moving without asking anyone's permission. If you're still awake enough to appreciate a small irony, here it is. Loki has forced the gods into introspection, which is not their favorite hobby. Gods like action. Gods like symbols. Gods like big stories with clear roles. Introspection is a very human pastime. It is the thing people do at night when they can't sleep, staring at the ceiling, thinking about something they said at a party 5 years ago. Now the gods have that feeling, only their party was mythic, and their ceiling is carved wood glowing in firelight. Loki has given them the ancient version of a sleepless cringe compilation, and the only cure is time. Time, however, is plentiful. That is the advantage and the curse of immortality. If you live long enough, every humiliation becomes either a lesson or a recurring joke. It depends on how the community handles it. Some gods may decide to treat Loki's words as poison and never speak of them again. Others may turn them into warnings for younger gods, the way families turn embarrassing stories into holiday traditions. Remember when Loki becomes a phrase that begins like a sigh and ends like a ritual. Humans do this too, of course. We retell what hurt us until it becomes small enough to hold. And so the hall, still warm, still smoky, begins to do that soft thing where it turns from event to memory while the event is still happening. The fire crackles, the smoke thins. The laughter does not fully return, but a smaller version of laughter might appear careful, polite, as if trying on normality again. Someone might tell a harmless story about fishing or sailing or something pleasantly dull, because dullness is soothing. Dullness is a blanket. A feast after an argument often turns toward boring details on purpose, like a person deliberately watching a slow documentary after a stressful day. The mind wants something that doesn't demand reaction. So the conversation, if it continues, becomes smaller. It clings to safe topics, the weather over the sea, the taste of the mead, the craftsmanship of the hall, the way the firewood was stacked, oddly specific cozy things, things that can be described without implicating anyone's honor. It is a form of self-care, though nobody would call it that. The gods are doing what anyone does when a room has been emotionally scorched. They try to water it with mundanity. And that's where the oath part becomes quietly important. The oath is not, we will never let this happen again, because of course it will happen again in some form. There will always be another Loki moment, another crack, another awkward truth that doesn't fit the desired story. The oath is more like, we will keep the hall standing anyway. We will keep eating. We will keep drinking. We will keep behaving as if community is possible, even when community feels fragile. That is the actual miracle of feasts, not the mead, not the singing. The miracle is that people return at all. So let your mind rest on the final image the myth offers, because it's gentle in its own bleak way. Imagine the last horn cup being set down carefully, as if the person placing it wants the sound to be as soft as possible. Imagine a cup that wobbles slightly and then settles, because even an awkward object eventually finds stillness. Imagine the hearth still burning because it has no opinion. Imagine the smoke thinning, the way it always does when the fire grows tired. Imagine the hall itself exhaling, a slow wooden exhale, as if it can finally stop racing. And then, instead of a neat ending, imagine the feast remembering, not with fireworks, not with prophecy shouted into the night, just with the quiet stubbornness of memory, a sentence here, a look there, a small discomfort that returns when you least expect it. The gods will carry that memory out with them like invisible soot on their hands. They will wash, and it will mostly come off, but not entirely. Some of it will remain under the nails, in the corners of thought, where small things like to hide. The hall will be used again. The horns will be filled again. Someone will laugh too loudly again, and someone else will flinch, and then pretend they didn't. The world will continue, not because it has solved Loki, but because continuation is what worlds do. And if you stay with that soft, drifting feeling, fire dimming, smoke thinning, cup settling, you can let the myth become what it always becomes at bedtime. Not a conclusion, but a hush, a warm, dark room, holding the faint echo of words that were sharp once and now are just part of the air, fading slowly as if the story could go on forever and you don't have to follow it all the way.